So, before we begin, I just want to say that tonight is Audrey Michael's yahrzeit, Daniel Michael's mom, and he's dedicating our shir in her memory, L'zecha Nishmas Ora Bas Avram Naftali. And I just want to say that I actually knew her. Esther and I knew her personally, and even my older kids remember her. They spent Pesach by us, by the Seder, Starim. I guess for me it was a Seder. For them, it might have been Starim. I don't remember, or maybe they kept one Seder. But I have to just say that Daniel's dad, both dad and mom, Daniel's dad and mom, both brilliant people, mamash brilliant people. But the dad was on the quiet side. But whenever he opened up his mouth, it was very kedai to listen. But Audrey was already an outstanding personality. She was very, expressive, articulate, fun. We spoke about I remember, I'll never forget, we spoke about a certain book that had come out, a Black Turns Rainbow or something like that, a book put out by Feldheim that Audrey had read. And Feldheim never reprinted the book because of the backlash.
Because of my mother?
What?
Because of my mother?
Your mother said, if it's about a girl that puts her mother through a very hard time after she becomes frum, right? And the mother has a very, very difficult time with her daughter in the house and the kashrus and the Shabbos and everything. But they try to show that at the end of the book, everything worked out. So I remember Audrey saying to me, she read the book, and if the girl was here, she would give her a spanking. That's what she said. If the girl was here, I'd give her a spanking. And it was a very English expression, I felt. But so L'zecha Nishmas today, Shahar Neshama Shavan Aliyah, Ora Bas Avram Naftali. Okay, so let me tell you, I gave you, in the first sheet I gave you was really what we want to do tonight. It's chapter Gimel in Melachim Aleph, and just one pasuk in chapter Dalet, as you see. But I dafka gave you the Haftorah. Why? Because this Haftorah comes out like an average between one and every 10 and 20 years. Sometimes it won't happen for 20 years, this Haftorah. Why? Because this Haftorah is Parshas Miketz. And Parshas Miketz, it's always Chanukah, right? And if you have two Shabbos in Parshas Miketz, so you read one type of Haftorah of one and Haftorah for the other, but it's really all about Chanukah, and it's not really about the Parsha. And this Haftorah, I had the mazel, mamash, the luck, that I happened to be by Reb Yaakov for Shabbos when they actually read this Haftorah, not on Chanukah. It wasn't Chanukah, they read this Haftorah. Now, at the time, I was young enough that I didn't even realize you don't read this Haftorah most of the time. I thought it was like you read it, once in a while you don't read it because of Chanukah. It's the opposite. Once in a while you read it because of Chanukah, right? So when we were walking upstairs from the shul, right, I asked Reb Yaakov a question about the Haftorah, and that's what, at least the first part of this lecture is about, is how Reb Yaakov understood the Chachma of Shlomo HaMelech. Okay, my question to him was, a little bit of a cynical question. When we got into the house, I said, Shlomo HaMelech had this great chachma. Two women come to him and they fight over a baby. Zel makula shali, zel makula shali. And Shlomo HaMelech decides at the end, yachloku, we should divide it in half, right? So I said to my grandfather, Zaidi, you don't think Reb Kivega could have done it? You don't think Reb Kivega could have done the same trick? So he laughed. He laughed when I said it. I says, I'm going to tell you a story. Okay. So I just want to show you something interesting before we start. Reb Yaakov, the story Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky prints, and he did research to see when and where the story happened. But if you look at the Haftorah, this is in the Ma'ar Chumash, right? The smaller Ma'ar Chumash. And it says, right, that this is the Haftorah Parshas Miketz, right? And it says over there, Shehi dumya de chalomos paro me'ein haparsha. Okay, because Paro had chalom, and at the end it says vayikatz paro v'inei chalom, and at the beginning on this pasuk, the first pasuk, or tesvav and gimel, vayikatz shlomo v'inei chalom. So when I read this, I was like quite surprised. That's not the reason why they put it together, because it starts off by katz paro v'inei chalom. Okay, maybe that's like a 10% of what the. Obviously, that's to do with the chachma of Yosef and the chachma of Shlomo. There's no question about it. Both of them got this chachma, from God, right? Both have said it's a chachma of God, but Yosef doesn't get it in a dream like Shlomo. Paro gets the dream. Shlomo gets the chachma in the dream. Paro gets Yosef to interpret the dream. So I think it really has to do with the chachma, and I don't know why they left it as she don't dumya the chalomus paro meina parsha. That's it's weak to me. I actually checked the Art Scroll Chumash, and they actually say they say it had to do with the wisdom of Yosef and the wisdom of Shlomo. So let's begin. Reb Yaakov. Let's not go into page 2. Page 2 we'll do second. Let's go into page 3. Okay. Here. 1 second. Let's go into page 3. Page 3, if you take a look at it's Membeis, right? And it says, Gimel Chavches, Vayishma'u Kol Yisrael is Mishpat, Asher Shafat HaMelech, Vayiru Mipnei HaMelech, Ki Ra'u Ki HaChachmas Elokim Bekirbo Lasos Mishpat. That's the end of the Haftorah, like two psukim before the end. Okay, now what does it say here? That the Jewish people, all of Israel, heard about this mishpat that Shlomo did between these two women, and how he, found out who the real mother was, and vayiru mipnei hamelech. So this is like, so to speak, the din Torah that made Shlomo famous, right? It's in the text of the Tanach too. You see, it's important, right? But it seems like the people heard about this, nationwide, and they were very nitpael from it. Okay, so when I asked Reb Yaakov, couldn't Reb Kiveger also do this? So it says like this by Reb Yaakov: "V'lachora ma chachma gedola kan, harei ein ze el tachbula shebo etzliach lachsof mi mishteim hi hashakranit." Right? It's a tachbula. It's a trick. Okay, you have to say it's a cunning trick or a sharp trick, right? How he did it, right? He through that trick, he was able to figure out who the real mother was. And if the woman, the shakranit, who baby had died and it wasn't her baby, if she was a bit smarter, right? She wouldn't have stumbled, because what does she say at the end? When Shlomo HaMelech says, cut the baby in half, so the real mother says, no, give it to her. And the other woman says, gam li gam lach lo yiyah, right? Gzoro, right? So that was like the final blow, so to speak, because once there was, one mother wanted to give it away, and the other one says, no, cut it in half, right? That obviously she's not the real mother, right? So Reb Yaakov says if that woman would have been smart, right? The way I heard it from Reb Yaakov was a little bit different the way Reb Yosef writes it. that Reb Yaakov said if the other woman would have chapped when the first woman said, don't cut it in half, give my baby to the other one, if she would have caught on, she would right away have said, oh, no, you're right. No, give it to the other one. Don't cut it in half. She would have agreed, right? And then Shlomo would have been stuck, been sort of a checkmate, right? So that's the way Reb Yaakov told to me. Reb Yosef writes it a little bit different. Where is this, very strong wisdom of Shlomo, Chachma Tzuma, right? This very powerful Chachma of Shlomo, who is Chachma Mikol Adam. Now, if you look at the bottom number 120. I'm going to read it for you. It's a great story. Because Reb Yaakov started laughing and he said to me, "You're right. There was a Rav in Litta who performed, but not in Litta. Maybe it was in Poland or in Warsaw. He performed the same trick." And he said, "I read it in a newspaper." And Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky found the newspaper. Okay. Rabbeinu Dimet, number 120, Dima Lamaisa Shahayish and the Sparsim Bitonuta Az, Bimora Hora'a Echad Bavarsha. Okay, it's in Varsha, right? By the way, Reb Yaakov told me where it happened, but I forgot. I couldn't remember all his little, like when he started describing each part of the story. But I remember the story very well. Okay? Al Reb Tzvi Hersh, Rosnish, Av Bezdin Levuv, Niftar Tov Kuf Samach. Hey, so Tov Kuf, right? That's already, he was probably living in the 1700s, probably. Okay. There were two women. One was rich and one was poor and one was rich. Now, Reb Yaakov didn't say it to me this way. He said one was very poor and one was like, had some money, they lived a middle class life. People in those days didn't have dryers, so they hung out there. My mother still did it, of course. They hung out their laundry on a line, right? And a lot of people used the different lines that were there. It was like a lot of houses, and they used the lines that were empty. And she, in other words, she liked the white shirts of her husband, of the other woman's husband, because they were newer. They weren't so shabby. So she said, she took down from the line the other woman's husband's shirts and said, "Shalihain." So here you have two women arguing over their husband's shirts. One says Shalihain, the other one says, "No, it's my husband's." They came before this Rav Tzvi Hersh. In other words, the wealthier woman said, the good shirts are mine, and the junky shirts that are already old and torn are hers. V'zosa shira omeres. Lo ki elam godim atovim shali. Oh, first the poor woman said it, right? Then now the rich woman says, "No, they're mine." Grum shalcha. Now they're both claiming that the shirts are theirs. Masa moritzedik hapikeach tziva l'shamish sheyavi lo et kol habegadim shaleim misdainos. He said, "Bring me all the shirts." That woman's shirts and that woman's shirts, bring me all that they're all this, that were hanging there. V'shalo b'nochatam amal ishto l'arbev b'tochem gam godim mishalah. And he here in this story, it looks like it's also the women's clothing also. But Reb Yaakov told it over to me that it was the man's shirt. So the Rav said, "Put in my shirts there too." Right? Put my shirts in there. Or if it's women's clothes, put your clothing in as well. And then he told the woman, they came to the Din Torah, there was all these shirts, 3 sets of shirts, the poor woman, the wealthier woman, and the Rav's woman's, shirts or clothing. She took out all the classy clothing. She picked out the good shirts, but she also picked out the Rav's shirts, right? And then the Rav took the shirts again and mixed them up and told the woman, the wealthier woman, and she just took out her clothing. Right? So in this story, it looks like it's the women. Reb Yaakov told it to me. I don't know if he maybe didn't remember the story exactly. It was the men's clothing. But in any event, the wealthier woman didn't take out the Rebbitzon's clothing or the Rav's clothing. She took out her own. So it was quite clear. A sharp move, right? You're telling me that the wisdom of Shlomo and the wisdom of the war Sadayan were the same. Their wisdom is the same, right? So I actually said to Reb Yaakov, it could be that he
this
knew
one's better.
Shlomo. What?
This tachbula is better because it didn't have the downside that she could have figured it out what to say.
Right. Right. Good. Right. And also, I felt that maybe he already knew the Haftorah of Shlomo Melech, and he already thought of it because everybody knew the story. So, but Reb Yaakov said, I have a different answer. Okay. So let's see what Reb Yaakov says. V'nira lomar dihine mahaya kore ima mitit hayta maskima sheyachatchu et avlad l'shnayim b'pchinat Thomas Nafshim Plishtim. If the mother, who of the real child would have said, agreed. Now, Reb Yaakov didn't say it to me this way. He said it the opposite way. He said if the false mother would have said exactly what the regular mother said, then he would be stuck. We think that Shlomo Melech would have said, if the other woman would have been smart and gave a similar taina to the real mom, Shlomo Melech would have said, I was just kidding. Right? That's the way we'd have to say this. Shlomo Melech would say, okay, lo kavanti b'rtzinut. Avozeina. Reb Yaakov says, that's not true. Ki biyara melech samchut misuyemes. Al chaye nesina. Because the melech has a certain samchut, right, on the life of his subjects. Like he could send people to war, even though they're going to get killed there, right? They can't say, well, I'm not going to war because I don't want to get killed, right? So he says he has a certain amount of weight that he puts on his subjects in the kingdom, right? With regard to their lives. Afkan me'achashet tzivu lachto keilu sheyesh kan din shemomen amutul besofik holkin. The Reb Yaakov said, when he said, cut the baby in half, it's as if he paskin momen amutul besofik holkin, even though obviously it's not money, it's a life. Hayuchotchem mishum kvod hamalchus. Reb Yaakov says they would have actually cut the baby in half because of kvod hamalchus. Because Melech says something, it happens no matter what. Sharei, it's a melech ein charata. There's no remorse by a king, like, I was just kidding. Kedisa Baba Basra, Malchusa Shainid Lo Hadrabe. Remember, the Gemara says about Herod. How was Herod allowed to, break down the Beis Hamikdash? You're not allowed to break down a shul till you build another shul. So the Gemara says, you can't bring me a proof you can't ask a kasha on Herod. The Omar Shmuel, Malchusa Akrana Ture Akar Ture. If a kingdom or a king says, or the kingdom says, pull up a mountain, like, what's the word? Lakel, a mountain to
uproot.
Uproot the mountain. You uproot it v'lo hadar bay. You can't go back on it. You can't say to the king, well, how are we going to do this? Right? No, you got to do it. Nimtza shetachbulas Shlomo HaMelech shona mikol tachbula ba'alma shematzliach harei ze tov v'lo matzliach ein hefsid. Right? It's different than all the other tachbulot, which many times in tachbulot, if it works, great. If it doesn't work, okay, it didn't work. You can't say that here. Ki b'tachbulot Shlomo HaMelech choyse munachas sakonas mavet liyeled. Right? It's not like I had a good trick and it didn't work. Okay, now we'll try something else. Right? Here, it's the baby's life is at stake. So if Shlomo Melech didn't know for sure, with his great wisdom, Lo shum tzel shel safek, she'ima amitis lo taskim sheyachatchu et bena, right? If Shlomo Melech didn't know this for sure, right, that the woman is going to respond that way, right? He wouldn't have never taken a chance because he'd have to cut the baby in half because of Malchus, right? Din Malchus, he'd have to cut the baby. So he had to be 100% certain that, number one, the woman who's the real mother would have reacted and said, give it to the other woman, and that the other woman, right, would have said, no, gam li gam loch lo yeh gzar. He had to be positive about this, right? Achen zui gadlus chachmas Shlomo sheyuchal laloch keneged ruach shel kol echad ve'echad shel yodei bavados keitzad kol echad yachshov v'yagiv. In other words, the greatness of Shlomo Melech, the chachma here is basically Shlomo Melech figured out 100% the psychology, and this is what Reb Yaakov said to me. He used the word psychologia of both women. How is this woman going to respond? And how is this woman going to respond? And he was 100% sure, even though in reality, right? In reality, in psychology, you can't know the response of another human being because maybe in other sciences, things work in a way that we could prove that something is going to respond in a certain way, right? With regard to chemistry or biology or something. But with regard to human psychology, we can never know 100%. One person could respond well to let's say medication, another person doesn't. One person could respond well to psychological analysis, and the other one doesn't fit in, right? But Shlomo Melech Be'ika was able to make psychology so much of a science that he knew how the other person was going to think, and he was able to size up the situation and know 100% that this is going to be the reaction. That is an unusual wisdom. Okay. By the way, here is one of the places that Reb Yaakov said, I mentioned this to you a few weeks ago, where Reb Chaim was able to figure out how the other person thought. In other words, I told you with Rev Fischl Ber, he asked Reb Chaim a shaila and he wanted to give him an answer. So Reb Chaim said, first I'll give you your answer, and then I'll show you why it's not good, and then I'll give you my answer, right? And he hadn't heard the answer yet. He just said, Chaim was going to give Reb Fischl Ber's answer, and he was right. And Reb Yaakov told two other stories like that, independent stories that he had heard over the years when he was in Lita about Reb Chaim. He was able to figure out how your academic thought worked, how your intellectual thought worked. But Shlomo was able to figure out every human being. Like Reb Yaakov says, Sheyuchal laloch keneged rucho shel kol echad. In other words, rucho here for Reb Yaakov means the personality of each person, how they're going to react, how they're going to react. But it was 100% because he wouldn't put a baby at risk otherwise. That's the way Reb Yaakov wanted to say. That is the Chachma of Shlomo. That's different than the Rav in Warsaw or the Rav in or a Reb Kiveger. Yes, Daniel.
Does this imply that Shlomo Melech already knew which one was the real mother and which one wasn't before he did the Tachbula? Because he was analyzing each one and how their reaction would be. That seems to maybe only make sense if he already knew himself which one was which.
Well, you could say that, he brings the sword, right? And he's thinking how the real mother will react, even if he doesn't know how the real mother's going to react and how the non-real mother's going to react. Mm-hmm. It could be.
Then it's a generalized psychological analysis and not a personalized understanding
Correct.
of the people in front of him, which
generalized,
makes it more
right.
difficult to understand that
exactly.
he could be 100% sure.
Exactly. You're saying something a little bit different. You're saying he realized about these two women who they were, right? Mm-hmm. These two women. I'm saying he realized in this situation what the reaction is going to be. Now, I don't know which one Reb Yaakov was saying. I can't see that. When Reb Yaakov told it over to me, I wasn't certain which he meant. Did he mean that he already analyzed who the real one is and now he just had to prove it? Or no, he figured out how they're going to respond. How does a woman whose real baby responds in this situation?
but when he was asking the question, he said that "Im hayta shakranit charifa yoter lo hayta nechshelet." Right? It seemed that at least the question took into account the possibility that there could be such a thing as a person answering differently.
Right, right. So you're right so you have a little bit of a riot to what you're saying, right? Because Rabbi Yaakov had to say that in this case he knew she wasn't smart enough to do it, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying. It could be. I just didn't hear it from Reb Yaakov when he said it over. It sounded to me more like, but I was a kid, so you never know. I was like maybe 15, 16 years old at the time. So I didn't really know exactly. But I hear exactly what you're saying. Did he figure it out, or by looking at the women that he knew this woman, that at least, he can play around with these women, that they're he's a lot smarter than them, and he knows how they react, right? I'm not sure. I'll raise it with Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky and see what he has to say. I hear really both, and I hear Uriah, what he says at the beginning, right? That he says, "Ve'im ha'isa shakranit charifa yoter lo ha'isa nichshelet," right? Right? So it sounds like she wasn't all that bright, right? I don't know if Reb Yaakov means she was like dumb or anything, but because the way I see it at the end of the day, this is an emotional reaction. It sounds to me like, if the second woman, the fact that the second woman reacted and said "Gamli gamloch," that to me is a tremendous, that he got her to say that, because you got to be crazy to say that. That's like checkmate, like Gamli gamloch. In other words, it sounds like, which at the beginning she wanted the baby because she didn't want the other woman to have her baby. Once we could get rid of the baby, that's the best thing. That's Mahadran, because I don't want this baby. Even though I'm holding the baby, I don't want this baby because it's not mine. So now he wants to kill the baby. Okay, this is exactly what I want. I was jealous. I don't want her to have it. Gamli gamloch lo yiyeh, right? So the way I understood Reb Yaakov, Shlomo figured out that a woman in this situation, right, is going to react this way because he knows the false mother wanted the baby not because she really wanted a baby, right? She didn't want the other woman to have her baby. Now, that again might be a little bit of a proof to you, because I'm not sure every woman would be like that. Could be a woman would want, to keep the baby. I don't know. It's not like they don't want you to have it. They want to have a baby, so they take the baby. I don't know. It's a good question.
Reb Shurin, just to summarize, to make sure that I understand Rabbi Yaakov's parish correctly, is he saying that it was the element of danger, that the risk of killing the child, that is what makes this chokhmah different than like the moats in Lita who
right.
Was the
in
danger
other words, that's why the Rav and Lita, whether it worked or not, right? Whether it worked, let's say the false woman who just picked out not the Rav shirts, but the other woman's shirts, the Rav would have been stuck. But Reb Yaakov says there's nothing gained or lost there, because okay, it didn't work, so we'll try something else, right? But with Shlomo HaMelech, right? If it didn't work, the baby would have to be cut in half. That's what the Reb Yaakov is forcing over here. That
the Melech can't change his mind.
You see from that Gemara in Baba Basra, Sharei Eitzel Melech Ein Charata, right? Don't forget, it would be a Bezoyin Amalchus. Could you imagine he calls this guy over and they're going to shech the baby, they're going to slaughter the baby, and the other woman,
kidding.
Yeah, he's looking. Kidding. It's a little bit embarrassing. So that's why he says that Shlomo had to know 100%, because the baby was at stake and Shlomo's covered for Malchus is at stake here. So that's what the Jewish people really saw. It's not that they just saw that he figured out he had a little bit of a trick. He tricked these women. It's much more than that. So that's the way Reb Yaakov understood it. Again, I'm sure other people must ask this question. I don't know. In the Rishonim, they don't ask the question. That I know, but maybe like today, the professors ask the question. I don't know if they ask it or not, but I assume that it is a good question. Like, is this the great Chacham of Shlomo Melech? When they say Chacham Mikol Adam, it's a great, like Rabbi Yaakov said, it's a great trick. But like to say that, that this is Einstein, I'm not so sure I'd say that so fast, So that's what Reb Yaakov was saying. I want to show you a different piece for Reb Yaakov as well today, which Reb Yaakov goes into a little bit more, the psychology of the two women. Okay, but before we do that, there's a piece right after the piece we did that I want to put in parentheses, but learn it with you. I told you many times, Reb Yaakov spoke about the fact that the non-Jews made up the chapters and, in Tanach, right? And, the names of the Shmuel Aleph, Shmuel Beis, Ezra Nehemiah. If I'm not mistaken, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky, when Reb Yaakov comments on the Sefer Nehemiah, right? So Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky has Ezra, and then when he has Nehemiah, he puts Ezra and Nehemiah in parentheses because Reb Yaakov said there's no such Sefer as Nehemiah, so he puts it in parentheses because he needs to put it there because you have to know what chapter or verse we're talking about. But Reb Yaakov had this problem. So whenever Reb Yaakov had a chance, he pointed out this problem. And one of the places is right here, okay? Take a look, Dalet Aleph, on the page that we ended, right below when we ended over here, Ketzad Kol Adam Yachshov V'Yagiv. So it says, Dalet Aleph, V'yehi HaMelech Shlomo, Melech Al Kol Yisrael. Okay? Pirush Rashi, Molech Al Kol Yisrael, Misharo Chachmaso, Samchu Kolam B'Malchuso. When they saw his wisdom, right, they all were happy with his kingdom. Till they saw his wisdom, they had questions about him. He's a kid. After all is said and done, is he going to be? Well, when they saw that wisdom of this young man, so he says, if you look at the Rashi is learning the new chapter, Dalet Aleph, on the last chapter, right? Vayehi HaMelech Shlomo Malach Al Kol Yisrael. Molach al Kol Yisrael misharo b'chachmaso samchu kulam. So it goes together when they saw his wisdom. So really, Dalet Aleph is really the end of chapter Gimel, but the Christians made it Dalet. They made it into a new chapter. Ad kal shel v'hainu shepasik zeu is siyum shel ha'maisa shel mishpat shlomo. This pasuk is the end of the story. The pasuk Vayehi HaMelech Shlomo Melech Al Kol Yisrael, right, is not a new chapter. It's the end of the story, right? Right after the story, it says Vayehi HaMelech Shlomo Melech Kol Yisrael. At least according to Rashi, that's the way Rashi's learning. After he did this, they accepted him as king. V'hainu shepasuk zu esim shel ma'aser shel mishpat Shlomo min hakapitel hakodem, from the previous kapitel. V'lochein Bo Parsha Stuma B'sof HaPasuk Hazeh. Therefore, if you look at your Tanach, right, the after this pasuk is where there's a new parsha. Okay, V'kan Masay Me'af Torah Shel Parshas Miketz, and you actually this last pasuk you read into Parshas Miketz, even though it's a new chapter, because it's the end of the story that the Jews accepted him as king. V'hinei dugma nosefes l'shibushei hanotzrim b'chalukas hakapitalim shalahem. This is another added shibush, right, mistake of the Christians in dividing the kapitla. K'moshe fridu parsha vayachulu misheshes shemei breishis v'simu kapitel al b'sof hayom Hashishi, right? Vayaros Kimlashov, Vayer Vayom Vayivoka Yom Hashishi, right? And now Vayachulu is a new parsha. It starts Beis. What do you mean? Vayachulu is part of the creation. What does Rashi say? Vayachulu Atzar Shemayim verse 12. Vayishbos Vayom Hashvi. Rashi says Bo Shabbos Bo Menucha, right? He was still creating stuff on Shishi. He was creating Menucha, right? So it's all part of the first chapter. But the Goyim, Vayichul Hashemayim is ready the second chapter. So Reb Yaakov says over there also that they made a mistake in the division. Now, again, it could be that it was total amaratzis, maybe over here too, or it's like there was a kavanah in doing it. Okay, maybe to separate the Shabbos from the 6 days. I don't know exactly what was going in their minds. But Reb Yaakov says the non-Jewish chapters are problematic in many areas. Okay, now on the bottom, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky says, "Karhiskim Rabbeinu lotzos chamisha chumshei Torah from Reb Moshe Eliezer Posner, London, Tavshim Memtes." In other words, the Dayan in London, Rev Eliezer Posen, put out a chumash with the correct chapters, not the Goyish chapters, but the Jewish chapters. Sheyesh bo chaluk al pi Masoras Chazal, v'lo kfi hakapitolim shel hanotrim. Ayin sham baskomas hagrash Vosner shekosov. V'kvar me'oz shamati mefakfakim al Chalukas HaKapitel v'adov ha'korav lonu latpis chumashim kimekodem shenosnu b'Sinai, and we should print chumashim like the chumashim that were given at Sinai, which of course there were no chumashim given at Sinai. Okay, the Torah was written Moshe at the end of his life. We always have that. Everything was given at Sinai. So my students always say that. So I always say to them, I think then the Jewish people are very retarded. So they say, why? He said, well, if the Parsha Meraglim Bamidbar was given at Sinai, they'd have to be crazy to send Meraglim and then say exactly what it says there in the Chumash. They'd have to be a little out there to do that. They couldn't be too bright. So they said, hey, Rabbi Shurin, that's a good question. So I said, it's not a question. They gave the Torah Misinai means all the mitzvos, but Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Sefer Torah B'Sof Chayav, right? But for some reason, Rev Vosner gets a little bit excited over here, and he writes, like they're given at Sinai. And the guy sent Reb Yaakov his Sefer, his Chumash that he had, or Tanach, and Reb Yaakov said, now, I don't know if Rev Posen, the Dayan Posen in England, in London, ever put out this Chumash. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I know that Reb Yaakov and Rev Vosner both wrote Askamas on this. And Reb Yaakov, he knew would love it because Reb Yaakov did want to make those changes, which I don't think will ever happen, because all our Gemaras are with those chapters and verses, right? Art Scroll today is not only the chapter, like we used to have on the side, the chapter, but not the verse. They even give the verse. So obviously this is going to be something that's impossible to change. You just have to know that what Rabbi Yaakov said was, you just have to know that sometimes you got to be very careful on not learning up the pshat in the text, like the division of the Goyim. That's basically the idea.
I have a Koran Tanach, which I'm pretty sure has the regular prakim and psukim on the outside, and then on the inside margin they have a different set of prakim that there's like Lefia Masorah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to say, I think it's let me just check.
The inside is Christian and the outside is the Hebrew, I think.
Oh,
Right,
I
correct.
haven't opened it in a long time.
Yeah. Here, I have it here.
Yeah, the inside is the Christian.
The inside is the Christian, right? And the outside is, but they have an introduction they have to read through, because the outside has chapters that also don't exactly fit. Some of those chapters are in the middle of a Petucha and Stuma. They're not at the Petucha and Stuma, right? So you have to take a look to see. Let me see if I could find one, let's say, that has this. Here. Yeah. So, for instance, in Shmuel Aleph, right, chapter Vav, right in the middle of the chapter, it says a Dalet on the outside. So it's also not by the Petucha and Stuma. So professors figured out, right, that there was a division that they made to able to finish the Tanach in 1 year. They made a division like that to be able to finish the Tanakh in 1 year. And where did they stop? They always stopped on a nice pasuk. not necessarily at the end of a chapter, but if you check, they're always stopping at a nice pasuk. Okay, I think that's what they write in the Hakdama. If I remember correctly, that's what they write in the Hakdama. There's a couple of other opinions about those chapters that quote unquote are what we would call not Christian chapters, but Jewish chapters. but the truth is that what Reb Yaakov felt, Reb Yaakov, I don't know if he knew so much. Reb Yaakov had a core in addition, not the Hebrew English, but the Hebrew edition. I never asked him about what he thought about the outside stuff, but I know Reb Yaakov did finish Tanach every year, right? And it could be Reb Yaakov used those numbers in order to do it. I don't know, right? But Reb Yaakov told me I finished the Tanakh once every year. He said to me, if you do 2 chapters a day, you'll also finish it once a year. So I don't know if he did that or he did 2 kapitlach but he always called it a kapitel. He never called it a parak. Kapitel, because that was the Yiddish for a capital, a new paragraph. But Reb Yaakov in many places does what he does here. Every time he catches the Christians on a little bit of a shibush, what he calls a shibush, he likes to point it out. Okay? There's one more thing I'd like to show you. On page, I skipped page 2, right? So on page 2, I'd like to show you something. Where Reb Yaakov here, there's a lot of different things that Reb Yaakov talks about here, but some of them the Rishonim talk about as well. So I didn't go into that. Like who was holding the baby? Was the real mom? Was the fake mom holding the baby? The pashtus I always understood was the fake mom took the baby from the real mom while she was sleeping, and she was holding the baby. Reb Yaakov has a question, maybe nobody was holding the baby. The king had taken the baby, and there was no muhsik at this point. And how did he have a right to take it out of muhsik? Reb Yaakov tries to prove from a Gemara. But maybe next time we'll talk a little bit about it. But Reb Yaakov has a piece on that as well. So the whole story here is a lot to talk about. But there's one place that Reb Yaakov continues on a little bit like the same idea of the psychology of the women. So that's why I wanted you to see it. In page 2, it says, Vayomer HaMelech, chapter Gimel Chavtal Chavav, right? Vayomer HaMelech Chuli Cherev, Vayiviu HaCherev, right? It says over there that the king said to, I guess he had a servant there, right? And the king said, Vayomer HaMelech, after each woman says what she said, Vayomer HaMelech Chuli Cherev, Vayaviu HaCherev Lei HaMelech, Vayomer HaMelech Gizru et hayelad achai l'shnayim usnu et hachetzi la'achas et hachetzi la'echad, right? Give it to this one and give it to this one, right? So, and then, okay, so Reb Yaakov says like this, l'chora. Now, Reb Yaakov raises a question here. I'm not so sure it's such a question, but I see why Reb Yaakov is raising it. He wants to say a vart, and he needs a question to say a vart. So he says it. Take a look. L'chora haseder anachon tzorich lio sheyitin kodem et psak hadin l'gzor et hayeled l'shnayim v'achar kach kedei l'kayim et hapsak yelchu v'yaviu cherev. No, the first thing of Shlomo HaMelech should have done is said the psak is to cut the baby in half. Now, please bring me a sword. Right? Bring a sword, right? He says, no, what happened, if you look at the story, is he says first, the king says, Chuli Cherev, Vayaveu HaCherev Lei HaMelech, and then the Melech says, now cut it in half. So nobody really knew what the king was doing over here. Someone could maybe try to figure it out, but it was such preposterous, so preposterous that I don't think anyone would have figured out. The king says, bring me a sword. Right? So what's going on over here? So Reb Yaakov says, in a normal case, you have the psak din, cut the baby in half. That's what the Beis did. And then you have to now cut the baby in half. Now you do, right? Shoftim v'shotrim. Madu efo higdim l'kichas hacherev v'avaso l'mokum l'fnei omro ma b'daito l'asosima. Why did he tell to bring the sword before, right? Before he actually said, what to do with it, right? In other words, he should have first given the psak that he cut the baby, and then go. Why did he bring the sword first and not say anything, right? He just said, go bring me the sword, right? V'nira lomar, sheyoda Shlomo Melech, she'ema mitit lo taskim levater al pri bitna, rak b'shor shenichmeru rachameh al bena. Shlomo Melech knew that this woman will, at a certain point, cave in, the real mother, because nichmeru rachameh al bena, because it says in the text that why did she do it? Because she just couldn't hold out her, her emotion for the child, connection to the child was just too strong. The Hainu, she's gabu rachameh berosa shekepesa beino ubein hamavis. That when is that going to happen? When she sees that he wants to cut the baby in half, right? That there's only kepsia, like a step between him and death. And in other words, only when she sees that this is real, it's going to really happen, then she's going to cave in and say, don't cut the baby, give it to the other woman. שצורך לחתוך את הילד לשניים, ועד שיביאו את החרב, ויעמדו לפני הביצוע, right? And from the time that he paskins the halacha, that you have to cut the baby, until they bring the sword, and they're standing before making it happen, taspika shakranit lit ashesh ulavin Shepia machshila imto magamli gamloch lo yegzaro, right? In other words, if he wouldn't have brought it suddenly, but he gave him the psak, cut the baby in half. So now everybody begins to think, what do you do here? So now he brings the sword, right? And meanwhile, the woman had a few moments to think about what she should say, right? In other words, Shlomo Melech wanted to catch them, by surprise. Because when you catch someone by surprise, you say something automatically, right? You don't think about it, right? What was that Freud said? Freud, used to have the person on the couch, and he would, I forget, free association, right? He used to say something, and what was your initial response? Free association. So Shlomo Melech wanted them to respond with their emotions. Had he said, the psak is cut the baby in half, and then he tells one of his servants, go bring me a sword, right? Till he brings the sword, you have a few seconds to think about, okay, what are we going to do here? He didn't want the false mother to have a moment to think and come up with a different answer than gam gili gam loch lo yiyeh, right? So that's what he says over here. Gamli gamloch lo yiyeh gzaro leumas gilu arachmim shel balas dina, right? The other Baal Din, the mother, right? Lachei tziva kodem lavet acherev bli lomar l'shem ma nitztrach acherev. He said, bring the sword without saying what you need the sword for. For rakar achar sheviu lo v'hayu muchadim zman levatzei psak hadin hamizazeh. When he was able to do the shocking din immediately, when he brought the sword, he said, now cut it in half. So that was a shock to everybody because they didn't know what the psak din was. Gila, right? Lahaftatan mahu. We revealed in their surprise, right? Haftah, right? What is going on here? In other words, he wanted the what do you call it of surprise? What's the language they use? The moment of surprise. They have a different language that they use for the surprise, right?
Element of surprise.
The what?
Element of surprise.
Element of surprise, right? In other words, and that way the woman wouldn't have a chance to think, and she'd react with her emotion, right? So here, Reb Yaakov, again from the pasuk, tries to fetch out how he's playing the psychology game with them, right? That he didn't bring the sword; that was intentional. It wasn't just stam that he didn't give the psak first. First, he brought the sword. Rebecca says that's intentional. Shlomo wanted to bring the sword that no one should know what he wants to do with it, and then he says, "Now cut it in half." and that then you only have a second to think, right? So he knew what the mother is going to say, and the other woman is going to say, because she doesn't have a moment to think. She's going to respond with her emotion, and that's gam li gam loch lo yiyeh. That's the way Reb Yaakov wants to understand the story. Okay, that's basically the idea. Any questions? Any points? This is Reb Yaakov's approach to it.
Yeah, Shurin, I want to ask you something.
Sure.
Something more general. I mean, I know that here in the Shir, that since we started it, we've done something similar to this, but I also remember in particular, there's a piece of Yaakov on Ki Kamocha Kiparo, which Yehuda says to Yosef, in which Reb Kamenetsky takes that example and two other examples in the Torah where he sort of psychoanalyzes. I don't use the word psychoanalyze. He says that people say something. The issue that he talks about there is how can Chazal say that people are thinking something and saying something, which is totally opposite of what they're actually saying. And he says, and he has this whole shot where he explains, like, people, he explains the whole human phenomenon that we say one thing but we really mean another thing.
Right.
And he uses that to explain Ki Kamocha Paro and two other places. So my more general question is like this: it seems to me that Reb Kamenetsky really was he was using psychology as a parshanut tool, as a tool of parshanut to explain.
That is correct. And you have a very good example. There are other examples of it, but that's a very good example. That's what and in fact, I wouldn't mind. I'll ask Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky if there are any pieces like that in Nach. I seem to remember that there is a piece like that in Nach, but I don't remember where it is.
I have to go back over my notes from this year because I think that there is at least one other example of these shiurim that we've done together where he said like a psychological. It seems like Reb Kamenetsky was very in his day, like Freud was all the rage in Europe.
Look, let me tell you, if you ask me, Reb Yaakov was a fan of psychology. He was. I don't know how much he read about it. I know he read Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, which Rabbi Yisrael Salanter talks about the conscious and unconscious.
Right.
Clearly, he has words for it. What?
Yeah.
And nobody knows where Rabbi Yisrael Salanter got it from. They don't know. The researchers in Hebrew University are also not sure. The famous Emmanuel Etkes, when he was asked, he says, I don't know which secular books he read in Germany to know this. I don't know if he figured it out. He himself said, which a professor usually doesn't like to say, he doesn't know, right? But he said he's not sure. And Reb Yaakov definitely took a lot out of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He took it very serious, the conscious and unconscious. And here you see, like, he sort of applies it to these different cases. If you ask me, did he ever read things by Freud or other psychologists? I have no clue that he ever did that. I would be surprised.
He wouldn't have to. I mean, just the whole psychology was a subject. It was a very cutting edge, hot subject in that time. And
right. I will tell you that the Alter Slabotka, I have a few places because of your issue. I looked through the Alters, some of his notes and stuff. And I did find at least a few, one I'm remembering right now, where he talks about this idea of what's going on deep down in the person, that sometimes the person himself doesn't know that it's going on because it's repressed, it's down there, but the person is feeling it on some level.
Yeah.
So Reb Yaakov was big on that. That's why Reb Yaakov had this concept, which, the rabbi, he loved it. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he loved this idea. It's called emotional intelligence, right? He wrote about this in a lot of different places. He quotes the original writers of it. He knew every one of these like books.
Howard Gardner.
Thousands of, I don't know how he did it, but he read through thousands of books, right? Especially these types of textbooks. He read through, like, when they wrote about a certain subject, he read like 3 or 4 books on the subject. He was just unbelievable. And so Reb Yaakov was big on emotional intelligence. He didn't call it that, but I don't know if he had a name for it. But I want to just tell you. I'll leave you with a story. Maybe I told you. I don't remember who I tell stories to, but Reb Wine said to me that, and he said it to a lot of people, if there was one person in my generation of Gedolei Torah which could be Chacham de Yehudai, right? Chachamai de Yehudai, which Rev Yehoshua was called in the Gemara, the wise one of the Jews. He said, I feel it's Reb Yaakov. Now, he got to know Reb Yaakov when he moved to Monsey. Okay, till then, he met Reb Yaakov a few times, but didn't get to know him. And he told me a story which he felt there's the conscious and unconscious of Reb Yaakov. And there's a lot of stories like this, but I'm going to tell you one of them. I don't know if I told you the story. He always found an excuse to drive Reb Yaakov somewhere. He would always find out, is Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky invited to the same wedding he's invited? If he was invited to the same wedding because they lived in Monsey, he would call Reb Yaakov right away. I have a ride for you to the wedding. I'm going to take you and your wife. He would always do this. This is what he told me, Rabbi Wine. And he said to me that they went to a wedding of a Holocaust survivor, and he only had one daughter. I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of the Holocaust survivors only had one child. I had 2 relatives, 2 cousins, that they were married, and they only had one child because they were so weak from the Holocaust, they really couldn't have more children. So this one person had one child, and he became a very well-to-do person, and she was getting married, and he wanted to make the nicest hall possible. So he kashered the New York Hilton, okay? He kashered the New York Hilton, and he made an unbelievable wedding for this daughter. So on the way home from the wedding, Rabbi Wine says to Reb Yaakov, of course he spoke to Reb Yaakov in Yiddish. He said, doesn't the Rosh Yeshiva think that the wedding was, okay, it's an only daughter, but doesn't he think it was a little bit over the top? It was so elegant and it was so expensive, the wedding. So Reb Yaakov said, I'll never forget it. He imitated Reb Yaakov when he said the answer. Reb Yaakov looked at him and he said, Rebero, that's what he called Rev Wine, Beryl Wine. Rebero. Du verstehst nicht. You don't understand. He was not making an expensive wedding. He was taking the come on Hitler. That's what Reb Yaakov said. He was not making expensive. He was taking the come on Hitler. So you know what I'm saying, Wayne?
Yeah.
Reb Yaakov was like, he thought about, like, what is this guy making? He's taking the come on
people.
Hitler. He happens to have to make an expensive wedding to take the Kama. He was taking the Kama on Hitler. You know how many Holocaust survivors told me this? That
for sure.
They were taking the Kama on Hitler because of X, Y, and Z.
I heard people say it about their grandchildren.
Right, exactly. So Reb Yaakov said, you don't understand. He's not a guy who loves to spend money. But he was taking the Kama on Hitler. So that's the emotional. What's going on deep down in the person, right? That's what. It is. But I'll ask Reb Yosef if there's any pieces like that, and we'll take a look at them. Yeah. Okay, take care.
Thank you very, very much.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The Neshama should have an aliyah, Michael.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.